Oh, I didn't know you guys were there. Thanks for joining me anyway. Hey, welcome to the shop. We are in front of my Shopsmith right now. Had a lot of questions and a lot of curious folks wondering how I built my drum sander. Pretty much a homemade drum sander. I'll bring you up close and I'll show you what I'm going to do. One of the first things I got to do is I got to replace the paper on this. It's getting pretty old. I'll show you how I made my drum, how I made my spindles, and how I made my tailstock and my table here, my adjustable table. It is really not even complete. I needed to build some cutting boards, and I kind of slapped it together, proof of concept. I have a lot of modifications I want to do to it. So it's kind of a good opportunity for me to show you how far I've got, how I've done it, and what I want to do to it in the next video for you guys. So stick around. This was set up as a table saw when I purchased it, and I did not intend on using it as a table saw because I have a dedicated table saw. This could also be used as a drill press, but I have a dedicated floor drill press also. So my intent was basically to use the power head, and I needed to make a drum sander. I also wanted to use it as a lathe. So my first project was to devise a drum sander system. So this is my drum. This is 80 grit sandpaper that I purchased on Amazon, and I use contact adhesive to adhere the sandpaper to the drum. This is a cardboard tube, okay, a heavy wall cardboard tube that I had a resource of a large supply of these actually, and they're reusable for quite a while. This is actually the first drum that I've ever even used. And I have quite a supply of these. My intent is to have multiple drums with multiple grits sandpaper. I just have never got to that process yet. The arbor that is on here is the actual table saw arbor. Okay, I've never been able to take off the arbor from the main shaft of the Shopsmith, but I've also not spent that much time attempting that. I made my own hub, I guess you would say, out of some laminated pieces of plywood, and I turned them with my makeshift chisel. I don't have any actual lathe chisels, so I made this. The next thing I did was laminate some more plywood together. My drum out of here. There we go. Laminate a few more pieces of plywood together so it'll hold onto the other end of my drum. This is a bicycle front bearing spindle, I guess you'd call it. It is not a Shimano, nothing high-tech, just a Japanese or Chinese ball bearing front hub. Again, proof of concept. I wanted to see if it was actually going to work. I'll take you to the tailstock and show you that, how I built that guy. Tailstock is basically just a box of MDF. These are actually 1.25" stair tread. Pretty stable, pretty heavy duty. Drilled, pilot hole, countersunk, screwed and glued together. And I've also run lag bolts down into a few braces underneath. I'll show you that. I've drilled I've cut a slot out here that will accept my hub, and I've mortised with a Forstner bit on the front side here So that hub will slide down in there. Again, proof of concept. It got probably 1,000,000 miles on this thing. It hasn't burned up. I've never greased the thing. I put a little lube in it the first time I ever used it. I wanted to make sure it wasn't going to explode. This tailstock is just clamped to the bedways, actually the rails on my Shopsmith. These two pieces of laminated oak flooring are not affixed to this in any way other than the lag bolts that go down through. These are two spacer rails, basically, that have a groove carved in them, so they'll center themselves on the rail. There's one on the front and there's another one on the back side. I have not moved this at all since it's been assembled. I'm not going to take it apart for you guys right now, but I will when I modify my table, my feed table, or my elevation table, whatever you want to call it. I will take this apart. I do have some plans in my computer that I will make available for this tailstock and the adjustable table, which will show the rails and all that stuff. You can see that there's just a piano hinge at the back side. This is hinged. It's not affixed really in any way. It's actually attached with a bungee cord. Again, proof of concept, guys. I wanted to make sure this is actually going to work. This bed right here is actually adjustable this way, back and forth. It's adjusted all the way back right now so it can have the maximum height between the bed and the drum. This is just I think it's a half 13 thread, long 6-inch long carriage bolt with a nut epoxied into a chunk of wood with a couple L brackets and a couple self-tapping screws. Very quick and dirty. Homemade knob that's epoxied onto the carriage bolt. And that is my adjustment. This thing has served its purpose, and I think it is time to make this a little more beefy and solid. I've not figured out yet. I have a lot of different ideas, and I've seen a lot of things on YouTube for a automatic feeding assembly system, but I didn't want to complicate this machine too much yet. So that is certainly another project I would like to do to get a more consistent thicknesser. You've noticed this right there is my router table. I usually have that router set up and I have a insert. That's not the greatest. I really want to remake this. I did not put this insert in when I'm using this jig right here because I just made this. This is actually a jointer. I have a 4-flute end mill, which is a 1/2-inch shank, and it's what I'm using because what I had actually. The cutting surface is 1.5 inches. So with these new butcher blocks I'm making, I needed to joint one edge. So I made a fence, which is basically a 2x2 and a piece of hardwood that's glued and screwed together and surfaced at 90 degrees. And then I've made these 2 pieces of oak that are also attached to my jointer fence. I've adjusted this outfeed piece of oak with, I believe, 6 layers of wet dry sandpaper, and it gives me a cutting depth where it's set right now about 30 thousandths of an inch. I was just basically designing this and setting it up, and I had not put my throat plate in. It was kind of proof of concept. It does look a little dangerous, and I do want to put my throat plate in here. One of the other things I'm going to do is absolutely need some sort of dust collection. With the router upside down, the fan in my Porter cable router blows the dust straight up in the air. So when I'm jointing, I get a bunch of dust flying up and landing on my head and going in my face and everything like that. But this works really, really well. I want to make a video of basically a better assembly and more of an adjustable assembly for this. I also have on my Amazon wish list a 2-inch long 2-flute Freud, it's a Freud router bit, 1/2-inch shank. It'll actually work a lot better. The 4-flute makes too many fine shavings, and I want to cut down to a 2-flute so I can go a little quicker across there. It's just attached with a couple C-clamps right now, so I'm going to move ahead on this right here. Like I said, I do not have a jointer, so that's one of the things I really want to get, but use what you got, not what you ain't. I'll take you over to the other end where I have just a few of my Shopsmith tools, the things that I use here. Obviously my table saw throat plate insert. Probably wondering why I have a rubber sole to a shoe, my old steel toe boot. But if you can see right there, there's a groove carved out of it. I actually use this piece of rubber to clean my drum on my Drumsander. That's one of my sanding tips I can give you guys. Clean out the pitch pretty often, pretty periodically when you're using any of your sandpaper, drum sander, spindle sander, belt sander, things like that. Clean that pitch out. An old rubber sole of a shoe or a boot works fantastic. Don't let it heat up too much because you'll embed some of that rubber into the sandpaper. If I have any stubborn areas, I use a wire brush. I've already shown you my makeshift carbide tool. I don't even know where this piece of carbide came from. Or actually, it's high-speed steel, I'm sorry. But I've ground that, and it works pretty good, other than the fact I need a much longer handle. You don't have a lot of control. But again, I was trying to make something happen, and I needed my spindles or my hubs for my drum sander, and I just made it. I got my 2 wrenches for my Porter cable router. This is a modified 10mm wrench that tightens my clamping base on my router so I can adjust it up or down. This right here is a modified 7/16 for the square, skinny part. Modified 7/16 wrench for this nut right here on my spindle. Needed to be skinny so I could jam this nut. Basically, you got to tighten this nut against the hub nut to adjust how tight that axle is on that spindle. My intent is to be able to use this, and I'll flip it around and it'll still go into my tailstock, and I'll sharpen this edge, and I can use that as a live center. Possibly I could attach a spur on the end of that I could use as a lathe. Moving on, my 7/8 wrench for my hub. This right here, this is a 3/4 inch piece of cast aluminum. And I cast myself with a homemade forge. And my intention is to machine this so I can use it as a faceplate on the Shopsmith. Again, that's going to be another project, guys. Sandpaper that I use currently is sheet sandpaper. It's actually in a roll, 4.5 inches wide, and the roll is, oh shoot, 10 yards, so 30 feet long. It's actually really good sandpaper. I found it on Amazon, and it was like $11 for 10 yards. What I used to do, and I still have some left over, I use a 36-inch, 4-inch wide sanding belt. And that was about the perfect length to wrap around that drum. These are 220 grit. Again, I bought these on Amazon. So that's always an option. So thanks for sticking around on my overview of my Shopsmith and how I use it. Mainly my drum sander, but also my router table and my jointer jig. Stay tuned for upcoming videos on how I strengthen this up, possibly build a feed system for it for my large butcher blocks. Obviously a big shroud over the top for dust collection. A more refined and more adjustable jointer system for use with my router. I also will be working on a live center, so I can use this more as a lathe. Maybe a tool rest I'll probably build. So stay tuned. Thanks a lot for joining me here at Making Sawdust. If you don't have all the fancy tools, you know you can use what you got, not what you ain't. So thanks for joining me, guys. And as always, get out and shop and make some sawdust.